The rain on Deneb Prime never stopped. Not really. It was more like a permanent mist that hung in the air, thick enough to soak through your clothes in minutes but thin enough to pretend you weren't slowly drowning in it. I'd been sitting in the same booth at the Crimson Spire for 3 standard cycles now, watching the condensation crawl down the window like it was trying to escape. The Spire was the kind of place where deals got made and memories got lost. Low lights, higher prices, and a clientele that checked their weapons at the door but kept their grudges close to their chest. The synthwood tables were scarred with years of negotiations gone wrong, and the air tasted like cheap stims and desperation. My name is Cale Varon. I'm a fixer. When the guilds need something done quietly, they come to me. When the syndicates need someone found, I find them. When an assassin needs a target vetted, I'm the one who makes sure the job isn't suicide. Which is why I was sitting in the Spire, waiting for a client who was already 3 hours late. The door hissed open, and I didn't have to look up to know who it was. The sound of footsteps was wrong, too heavy for a human, too measured for a Zellari. The scent hit me a second later, ozone and something metallic, like blood that had been left out too long. Dregger Voss. He was a Dreekin, which meant he was tall, scaled, and had more teeth than was strictly necessary. His kind had evolved from apex predators on a death world called Kryksos, and even though they'd been part of the Galactic Compact for centuries, they never quite lost that look in their eyes. Like they were always calculating how long it would take to eat you. "Varon," he said, sliding into the booth across from me. His voice was gravel and broken glass. "Voss," I replied, not bothering with pleasantries. "You're late." I had to make sure I wasn't followed. I snorted. "You're a Dreekin. No one follows you unless they want to be eaten." He showed me his teeth, what passed for a smile in his species. "You'd be surprised what people will do for credits." I signaled the bar for 2 drinks. The bartender, a weathered old Zellari with one eye and a bad attitude, nodded and started mixing something that looked like it could strip paint. "What's the job?" I asked. Voss leaned forward, his claws tapping against the table. "I need someone taken out." "Who?" "A human." I felt my stomach drop. Not because the job was impossible. Humans were easy enough to kill if you knew what you were doing. But something about the way he said it made my instincts scream. "Which human?" "Does it matter?" "It matters if I'm going to find someone willing to take the contract." Voss's eyes narrowed. "His name is Marcus Thorne. He's a merchant, operates out of the Rim territories, runs a small shipping company. He's been interfering with certain operations." "Interfering how?" "He's been helping people escape." I took a slow breath. "Escape from what?" Voss's jaw tightened. "From the syndicate, from me." Of course, I should have known. Dregger Voss wasn't just any Dreekin. He was one of the most powerful crime lords in this sector. His operation was built on indentured servitude, debt slavery, and the kind of human trafficking that made most people lose their appetite. And some human merchant was cutting into his business. I shook my head. "I'm not touching this." "I'm not asking you to take the job," Voss said, his voice dropping to a dangerous whisper. "I'm asking you to find someone who will." "Voss, do you have any idea what happens to assassins who go after humans?" He laughed, a sound like grinding rocks. "You're afraid of a few primitive apes." I leaned forward, lowering my voice. "You think they're primitive. You think they're easy targets. Let me tell you a story." Voss leaned back, his expression skeptical but curious. 5 years ago," I began, "the syndicate put a bounty on a human colonel named Sarah Chen. She'd been leading resistance cells on a dozen worlds, freeing thousands of slaves. The bounty was 50 million credits." Voss's eyes widened slightly. "That was a fortune." "Assassins came from everywhere," I continued. "Kryxian death priests, Vorlag neural cutters, even a Ziran shadow dancer, one of the deadliest beings in the galaxy. They all went after her. And the Kryxian was found in his ship, throat cut from ear to ear. The Vorlag's own neural cutter was used to wipe every memory from his mind. They found him wandering the lower levels of Aleph Station, drooling and blank. The Zirin. They found pieces of her scattered across 3 systems. No one even knows how the human pulled that off. Voss's scales had gone pale, a sign of distress in his kind. That was one human, I said. One unarmed, supposedly primitive human, and she killed 3 of the best assassins in the galaxy. She had help, Voss insisted. Of course she had help, I agreed. But not the kind you're thinking. You know what the humans did when the Syndicate started hunting her. They showed up, in force. A human fleet materialized out of nowhere and wiped out the Syndicate's entire operation in that sector. They didn't negotiate. They didn't take prisoners. They just ended it. I let that sink in. That was 5 years ago, Voss said, but his voice had lost some of its confidence. 5 years ago, the humans had just discovered faster-than-light travel. They'd been a spacefaring species for less than a century, and they still managed to defeat a Syndicate fleet that had been terrorizing the galaxy for 500 years. Voss was quiet for a long moment. Then he said, "The target isn't a military officer, he's a merchant, a simple ship captain." "Marcus Thorne," I said, tasting the name. "You know how a human gets to be a merchant captain on the Rim?" "I don't care." "You should, because the Rim territories are the most dangerous place in the known galaxy. Uncharted space, pirate factions, rogue AIs, worse things. And humans survive there, thrive there. They've carved out a corner of the galaxy that even the major powers are afraid to touch." I paused, letting the words land. "And this human, this simple ship captain, has been operating in your territory for years. You haven't been able to stop him. You haven't been able to catch him. And now you want me to find an assassin who's willing to go after him." Voss's claws were digging grooves into the table. "The guild has rules. A contract is a contract. The assassin doesn't have to understand the target, they just have to. They have to survive the encounter," I cut him off. "And no one has survived hunting a human, not the kind who does what Thorne does." I reached into my jacket and pulled out a datapad. I'd done my research before coming here. It's what any good fixer does. "Marcus Thorne," I read aloud. "Former Earth military, decorated veteran of the Vikari War, Silver Star, Bronze Cross, and 3 Purple Hearts. He retired from active duty and bought a small freighter with his savings. Started a shipping company that specialized in humanitarian aid." "So he's a do-gooder," Voss sneered. "He's a combat veteran who spent 10 years fighting the Vikari," I said flatly. "The same who nearly conquered the core worlds. The same who had the Galactic Compact on the verge of collapse. And he not only survived, he thrived. He killed more of them than most soldiers see in a lifetime." Voss was silent. "You want me to find an assassin to kill a human who's already survived the worst the galaxy could throw at him? A human who fights like a demon and thinks like a tactician?" "It's just one man," Voss growled, but I could hear the uncertainty creeping in. "It's never just one man," I said. "Not with humans. You go after one and you're going after all of them. That's how they work. That's how they've always worked. They don't see themselves as individuals when one of their own is threatened. They see themselves as a species, and they will never ever back down." I stood up, tossing a few credits on the table for the drinks we hadn't touched. "The answer is no. No assassin with any sense would take this job." Voss rose too, his bulk blocking the light. "You're refusing me." "I'm saving your life," I said, "and the life of whoever you'd send after him. Find another way to deal with your problem. Or better yet, leave the humans alone. It's the only way to survive." The Crimson Spire was quieter now. The rain had picked up, hammering against the windows like a desperate hand. I could feel Voss's eyes on my back as I walked to the door, his rage simmering just below the surface. I wasn't worried. He wouldn't kill me, I was too useful, but I knew he wouldn't let this go either. He'd find someone else, some fool who didn't know any better, and that fool would die. Humans were a special kind of madness. The rest of the galaxy had spent centuries building civilizations, defining rules, developing the technology that made life comfortable. Humans had spent that same time fighting. Not each other. Well, yes, each other, but mostly just fighting to survive. They'd come from a planet that wanted them dead, and they'd adapted, evolved, become something the galaxy wasn't prepared for. I'd studied humans extensively. It was part of my job, understanding targets, understanding threats. And the more I learned about them, the more I realized that the galaxy had completely misunderstood what it was dealing with. They saw the humans as violent, primitive apes who stumbled into the galactic community by accident. They saw a species that was still fighting wars on its own homeworld, still divided by petty differences. What they didn't see was the truth. Humans were the toughest, most adaptable, most terrifying species in the known galaxy. I'd seen it with my own eyes. A human soldier, wounded and alone, holding off a Vikari assault team for 3 days. I'd seen human engineers repair impossible damage to ships that should have been scrap. I'd seen human doctors save patients that other species would have given up on. There was something inside them, a spark, a fire that refused to go out. And that was what made them so dangerous. I stepped out into the rain, letting the mist soak into my clothes. The street was mostly empty, lit by the flickering glow of neon signs. A few aliens scurried past, their heads down, wrapped in protective gear. In the distance, I heard the hum of a ship's engines. A sleek, ancient freighter was descending through the clouds, its hull battered and worn. It landed in the spaceport a few blocks away, and a small crowd gathered at the gate. I recognized the ship. The Ether Star. Marcus Thorne's ship. I felt a chill run down my spine that had nothing to do with the rain. Voss wasn't going to find some assassin. He was going to hire the best, and I knew exactly who he'd go to. Time to meet the human. The spaceport was a chaotic mess of cargo containers, alien merchants, and the constant hum of machinery. The Ether Star sat in a docking bay that was too small for it, its hull covered in scorch marks and patched plating. It looked like it had been through a war. Because it had. I approached the ship, my hands visible, not wanting to spook anyone. A human emerged from the cargo ramp. A woman, tall and lean, with short dark hair and a scar that ran from her temple to her jaw. "Can I help you?" Her voice was calm, but her eyes were sharp. She was already assessing me, cataloging threats, calculating exits. "I'm looking for Marcus Thorne," I said. She didn't move. "Who's asking?" "My name is Cale Varon. I'm a fixer. I have information he might want." She studied me for a long moment. Then she said, "Wait here." She disappeared inside the ship, and I stood in the rain, feeling exposed. The spaceport was full of people, but I suddenly felt very alone. A few minutes later she reappeared. "He'll see you." I followed her up the ramp, my boots echoing on the metal. The inside of the ship was a contrast to the battered exterior, clean, organized, lived in. There were small touches that made it feel like a home. A potted plant, a book on a table, a child's drawing taped to a bulkhead. That was the other thing about humans. They always brought their homes with them, no matter how far they traveled. Marcus Thorne was waiting for me in the common room. He was shorter than I expected, with graying hair and a face that had seen more than its share of hard years. But his eyes, those pale blue human eyes, were sharp and clear. They saw everything. "Mr. Varon," he said, gesturing to a seat, "what can I do for you?" I sat down, suddenly aware of how out of place I was. This human, this simple merchant, had presence. It was like sitting in the room with a predator. "Your life is in danger," I said. "Someone wants you dead." He didn't react. No surprise, no fear. Just a calm acceptance, as if he'd heard those words 1,000 times. Who? He asked. Dregger Voss, Drekin crime lord. You've been interfering with his operations. The human's lips twitched. I've been helping people escape his operations. There's a difference. Is there? To the people I save, there is. I shook my head. He's going to hire an assassin, the best one he can find, and I paused, choosing my words carefully. I refuse to find one for him. Why? Because I know what happens to assassins who hunt humans. Thorne studied me for a long moment. Then he said, You seem to know a lot about us. I make it my business to know. And what do you know? I leaned forward. I know that your species is impossible to predict, that you refuse to stay dead, that you'll fight to the last breath for each other no matter the cost. I know that the galaxy underestimated you, and I know that it paid the price. Thorne nodded slowly. And you think that'll keep me safe? No, I said, but it'll make the assassin regret taking the job. The woman with the scar had been standing in the corner, silent and watchful. Now she spoke. We should increase security, put the ship on alert. Thorne held up a hand. Not yet, let's see what he does first. Sir, with all due respect. Elena, we've been through this before. His voice was gentle but firm. Running isn't going to help, fighting might, but first we wait, we see. Elena nodded reluctantly. Mr. Varon, Thorne said, turning back to me. Thank you for the warning, I appreciate it. That's it, I said, surprised. You're not going to run, not going to ask for help. Would it make a difference if I did? I opened my mouth to answer, then closed it. He was right, it wouldn't. One more thing, I said. I know who Voss is going to hire. Thorne raised an eyebrow. Tarek Stroud, I said. Zirin's shadow dancer, the best in the business. He's never failed a contract. Thorne's expression didn't change. And you think he'll succeed where others have failed? No, I said. I think he's going to die. I stood up, ready to leave, but something made me stop at the door. You know, I said, I've spent my whole life dealing with assassins, crime lords, and all the worst the galaxy has to offer. And in all that time, I've learned one thing. Thorne waited. Never underestimate a human. The rain had stopped by the time I left the spaceport. The mist had cleared, revealing the neon-lit skyline of Deneb Prime's capital city. Somewhere up there, in the cold darkness of space, Marcus Thorne was doing the impossible. And somewhere else, Tarek Stroud was preparing to do the unimaginable. I tried to warn them both, but I knew deep in my gut that neither would listen. The galaxy was about to learn a lesson, the kind of lesson that left scars. Part 2, The Hunter. The Zirin were a species of shadows, literally. They'd evolved on a planet where the sun never quite reached the surface, where darkness was the natural state of things, and light was a rare, terrifying anomaly. They'd adapted to a world of perpetual twilight, developing senses that could perceive the faintest movements, the smallest changes in pressure, the softest sounds. And Tarek Stroud was the best of them. I'd met him once, years ago, before I'd become a fixer. He'd been contracted to kill a syndicate officer I was working for at the time. I'd been young, foolish, and convinced that the galaxy was a place where rules mattered. Stroud had proven me wrong. He'd walked through a facility that was supposed to be impenetrable, past guards who were supposed to be unbeatable, and killed a man who was supposed to be untouchable. And no one had seen him, not once, not even on the security feeds. When I'd finally met him face to face, in a dimly lit bar, just like the one I'd just left, I'd asked him how he did it. He'd smiled, a thin, cold expression that never reached his eyes. I'm a shadow, he'd said. I don't exist until I need to. And then he'd vanished. I'd been careful never to get in his way after that. But now, sitting in the Crimson Spire, watching the door, I knew he was coming. Voss had called him. Voss had offered him the contract. And despite everything I knew, everything I'd warned, Tarek Stroud was going to hunt a human. The door hissed open and he walked in. He was shorter than I remembered and thinner. His skin was the pale gray of his species, almost translucent in the dim light. His eyes were black pits, giving away nothing. He moved with the liquid grace of something that had never quite given up hunting. "Cale Varon," he said, sliding into the booth across from me. "It's been a long time." "Not long enough," I said. He laughed, a dry, papery sound. "You haven't changed." "You have, you've gotten older." "We all do, even shadows." I signaled the bartender for drinks. The same old Zalari, the same dubious mixture. Some things never changed. "I heard you refused the contract," Stroud said. "I heard you accepted it." He shrugged. "The credits are good." "The credits won't matter when you're dead." Stroud tilted his head, curious. "You really believe that? You think this human is going to kill me?" "I think you should walk away." "Why?" I leaned forward, lowering my voice. "Because I've seen what happens to people who hunt humans. I've studied them. And I'm telling you, Tarek, this is a mistake." He smiled that thin smile again. "I've killed hundreds of targets. Zalari, Kryxian, Vorlag, even a few Dreekin. They all thought they were special. They all thought they could survive. This is different." "How?" I took a breath. "Because humans are the only species in the galaxy that doesn't know how to stop. They don't give up. They don't surrender. They don't understand the concept of impossible. To them, there's always a way, always a chance, always a fight to be had." "You sound like you admire them." "I respect them," I admitted. "There's a difference." Stroud studied me for a long moment. "And this human, this Marcus Thorne, what makes him so special?" "It's not about him being special," I said. "It's about what he represents. Every human who's ever lived, who's ever died, who's ever struggled to survive, they're all inside him. And if you kill him, you're not just killing one human. You're fighting their entire species." Stroud was quiet, then he said, "You've been drinking." "I haven't touched a thing." "Then you've lost your nerve." "Maybe," I met his eyes, "but I'm still alive, and that's more than I can say for the people who think they can take on humanity." He stood up, tossing a few credits on the table. "You always were a coward, Cale. That's why you became a fixer instead of a killer." "Call it what you want," I said. "But when you're lying in a pool of your own blood, remember what I told you." He paused at the door, not turning around. "Let me tell you something I've learned over the years," he said softly. "Every target is afraid. Every target has doubts. Even the ones who seem invincible, they all die in the end." And then he was gone, leaving me alone with the rain and the ghosts. I sat there for a long time, staring at the door. Part of me wanted to follow him, to try and talk some sense into him, but I knew it was useless. Tarek Stroud had made his choice, and now he was going to pay the price. The Ether Star was still docked at the spaceport when I arrived. The rain had started again, heavier this time, and the city was wrapped in a wet, gray blanket. The spaceport was nearly empty, most of the merchants having retreated to their ships or the bars. I found Elena standing guard at the cargo ramp, her face hard and unreadable. "He's inside," she said. "Wait." I waited. The ship hummed around me, ancient engines and old machinery keeping the systems running. I could hear voices from inside, children laughing, music playing, the sound of life. It felt strange. This was a ship that was about to be attacked by the deadliest assassin in the galaxy, and it felt like a home. Thorne appeared a few minutes later, carrying a small child on his shoulders. He set her down gently, and she ran off into the ship, giggling. "You have a family," I said. It wasn't a question. "Yes," he said simply, "I do." "And you still didn't run." "Why would I run from an assassin?" "Because he's going to kill you." Thorne smiled. "He can try." I felt a wave of frustration. You don't understand. Tarek Stroud is the best. He's never failed a contract. He's killed more people than I've ever met. And you're just, I gestured at him, at the ship, at everything. You're just standing here. Would you like me to scream and run around in circles? No, I want you to take this seriously. I'm taking it very seriously. His voice was calm, steady, but running away isn't the answer. Fighting, protecting, surviving, that's what we do. That's what we've always done. I shook my head. You're insane. Maybe, he shrugged, but I'm still here. I was about to argue when I heard it. A sound, soft, almost imperceptible, like silk sliding over stone. My blood ran cold. He's here, I whispered. Thorne didn't react. He just looked at the spaceport, his eyes scanning the darkness. Alina, he said quietly, get the others inside, lock everything down. Alina nodded and disappeared into the ship. And then we waited. The spaceport was silent. The rain had stopped again, leaving behind a thick, oppressive quiet. I could feel my heart beating in my chest, my breath coming in short gasps. I couldn't see anything. I couldn't hear anything. But I knew Tarek Stroud was there, somewhere in the darkness, waiting. And then the attack came. It wasn't an explosion or a flash of light or anything dramatic. It was just pressure. A sudden, overwhelming sense of something moving, something shifting, something wrong. And then Alina screamed. I turned and I saw it. Tarek Stroud emerging from the shadows like smoke, his blades already drawn. He'd gotten past Alina somehow, past all the security, past everything. And now he was inside the ship. Thorne was already moving. I've seen humans fight before. I've seen them in combat, in crisis, in the middle of impossible situations. But I'd never seen anything like this. Thorne didn't flinch. He didn't hesitate. He just moved, his body flowing like water, his hands finding weapons that I hadn't even noticed. Within seconds, he was face to face with Stroud, their blades clashing in the confined space. The fight was brutal. Stroud was faster, more precise, more deadly. But Thorne was relentless. He took hits that would have killed any other species, shrugged them off, and kept fighting. He used the environment, the ship, his body, anything and everything to keep going. At one point, Stroud had him pinned, his blade at Thorne's throat. Victory was moments away. And then Thorne smiled. You know, he said, his voice calm and steady, I've been in worse situations. And he headbutted Stroud, hard. The Xeran stumbled back, stunned. Thorne followed up with a flurry of blows that drove Stroud into a corner. For the first time, I saw something like surprise on the assassin's face. He wasn't going to win. I don't know how I knew, but I knew. Thorne was going to survive. Stroud lunged forward, going for a killing strike. Thorne sidestepped, his hand flashing out, and suddenly Stroud was on the ground, gasping, his weapon skittering across the floor. And then it was over. Thorne stood over Stroud, breathing heavily, his clothes torn and bloody. Stay down, he said. Stroud looked up at him, his black eyes wide with confusion. How? I'm a human, Thorne said simply. We don't give up. And he walked away. I found Stroud later, sitting in the spaceport's medical bay, his wounds being treated by a human doctor. He looked defeated, broken in a way that went beyond physical injury. You were right, he said quietly. I should have listened. I sat down next to him. You survived. Barely, he laughed, a hollow sound. He could have killed me, he had every chance, but he didn't. That's what humans do, I said. They show mercy. Mercy, Stroud snorted. That's not mercy, that's something else. Maybe it's hope. Stroud was quiet for a long time. Then he said, I've never met anyone like him. I've never seen anyone fight like that. He was incredible. He's just a man. No, Stroud shook his head. He's more than that. He's everything you said he was. He's the whole species fighting for everything they believe in. He's just trying to survive. Maybe that's what makes them different, Stroud said. They're not fighting for power or credits or glory. They're fighting for something else, something I don't understand. I stood up ready to leave, but I paused at the door. Maybe that's the point, I said. Maybe you're not supposed to understand. You're just supposed to respect it. I walked out of the medical bay into the rain and looked up at the sky. The stars were hidden behind the clouds, but I knew they were there. 1 billion trillion stars, each one holding 1 billion trillion possibilities. And somewhere out there, humans were spreading, not just surviving but thriving, building homes, starting families, carving out a piece of the galaxy for themselves. They were impossible, they were unstoppable, and they were never going to stop. Part 3: The Aftermath. A standard month passed before I saw Marcus Thorne again. The galaxy moved on as it always did. Wars were fought, deals were made, and the Syndicate found new ways to exploit the helpless. But somewhere in the Rim territories, a human merchant was still saving lives. I found the Ether Star at a small outpost called Haven 7, a collection of barely habitable asteroids that had become a haven for refugees. The ship was being repaired, its hull covered in fresh scorch marks that told stories I didn't want to imagine. Thorne was supervising the repairs, his face lined with exhaustion. He looked older than I remembered, but his eyes were still sharp. "Varen," he said, nodding at me, "I didn't expect to see you again." "I didn't expect to be here," I admitted, "but I had to see how you were doing." He smiled. "I'm still alive. That's more than most can say." We stood in silence, watching the workers repair the ship. The outpost was bustling with activity: refugees, merchants, aid workers. All of them had been saved by this man, and they didn't even know it. "Thank you," I said quietly, "for what you did." He looked at me surprised. "What do you mean?" "You could have killed Stroud, but you didn't. You showed him mercy." "Mercy isn't weakness," Thorne said. "It's strength. It's the ability to choose not to kill, even when you have every reason to." "Is that a human thing?" He laughed. "It's a good person thing. Species doesn't matter." I nodded slowly. Maybe that was the lesson I'd been missing. It wasn't about humans being special. It was about them being human, about choosing to be better even when the universe gave them every reason to be worse. "The galaxy is changing," I said. "People are starting to realize that humans are different, that you're not just another species." "I don't think we're different," Thorne said. "I think we're just persistent. We don't know how to quit." "That's what makes you dangerous. That's what makes us human." I was about to leave when a child ran up to Thorne, a little girl with dark hair and bright eyes. She threw her arms around his legs, and he scooped her up, laughing. "Can we go home now?" she asked. "Soon," he said, "soon." Home, that was the thing about humans. They always had a home to go back to, not just a place but a feeling, a sense of belonging that made them fight so hard. I nodded at Thorne and walked away. The galaxy was still the same, full of darkness, danger, and despair. But somewhere in the middle of it all there were humans, and they were changing everything. I was back at the Crimson Spire when I heard about what happened next. Tarek Stroud had disappeared after the incident on Deneb Prime. Some said he'd gone into hiding, ashamed of his failure. Others said he'd been killed by the Syndicate for failing a contract. But I knew the truth. He'd been changed by his encounter with Marcus Thorne. He'd seen something in the human that had broken something inside him. And then, 3 months later, he resurfaced. Not as an assassin, as something else. I was sitting in the spire nursing a drink when the door hissed open. Stroud walked in, but he was different. He wasn't the cold, distant shadow I remembered. He had warmth. "Varen," he said, sliding into the booth across from me. "Stroud, I heard you were dead." "I was, in a way," he smiled, a real smile, "but I've been reborn." "What do you mean?" He leaned forward, his eyes bright. After Thorn let me go, I couldn't stop thinking about what he said, about mercy being strength, about choosing to be better, and I realized I've been doing everything wrong. My entire life I've been taking, killing, destroying, but there's another way. What way? Giving, protecting, building. He paused. I've started a new organization. We help refugees escape the syndicate. We protect the vulnerable. We fight back, but with compassion, not cruelty. I stared at him. You've started a resistance movement. I've started a movement, he agreed. Not just against the syndicate, against everything that's wrong with the galaxy. I shook my head, amazed. Thorn did this to you. He showed me the way, Stroud said. He showed me that there's another path, a better path. I sat back, processing this. The deadliest assassin in the galaxy had been converted by a human merchant, not through violence but through mercy, not through fear but through hope. Where do you go from here? I asked. Wherever I'm needed, he said. I'm going to help people, I'm going to save people, and I'm going to do it without killing anyone. That's a big promise. I know, he stood up, but if a human can do it, so can I. He left the spire, and I was alone with my thoughts. The galaxy was changing. It had to. The humans were changing it not through force but through example. They were showing the rest of us what was possible, what we could be. And it was terrifying, but it was also beautiful. I never saw Marcus Thorn again, but I heard stories, so many stories. I heard about him saving a Vorlag colony from a plague, using his own resources to bring medicine and supplies. I heard about him facing down a Dreekan fleet, talking them down with nothing but words. I heard about him building a network of safe houses across the rim, giving refugees a chance to start over. And I heard about the assassins who came after him, dozens of them over the years. None of them succeeded. Some of them died. Some of them, like Stroud, were changed. They couldn't understand it. How could one human survive against all of them? How could one man be so impossible to kill? But I understood. It wasn't about skill or luck or even strength. It was about something deeper, something that had been forged in the fire of 1,000,000 years of struggle. Humans had survived extinction-level events. They'd survived wars, plagues, and all the horrors their own species could dream up. They'd survived because they refused to stop fighting. They'd survived because they refused to give up hope. And now they were teaching the galaxy the same lesson. One night, years later, I was sitting in the Crimson Spire when a familiar figure walked in. Marcus Thorn. He was older now, his hair fully gray, his face lined with wrinkles, but his eyes were still sharp, still burning. Varen, he said, sitting down across from me, it's been a while. Too long, I said. We sat in silence for a moment, the rain pattering against the window. I heard about what you did, I said. The refuge, the network, all of it. I just helped people, he said, that's all. To you maybe, but to them, you were everything. He shrugged, uncomfortable with the praise. Why did you do it? I asked. Why did you risk everything for people who had nothing to give you? He thought about it for a long moment. Because I could, he said finally. Because if I didn't, who would? The galaxy is full of people who have the power to help but don't. They're too busy fighting, too busy scheming, too busy trying to get ahead. Someone has to be the one to stop and say, this is enough. Let's do something better. And you chose to be that person. Someone had to, he smiled. It might as well be me. I shook my head. You're something else, Thorn. I'm just a man. Maybe, but you're more than that. You're hope. You're the proof that the galaxy can be better. He stood up, ready to leave, but he paused at the door. You know, he said, I've met a lot of people in my life, a lot of species, a lot of cultures, but I've never met anyone who made me feel like I was doing the right thing. Until you. What do you mean? When you came to warn me all those years ago, you could have stayed out of it, you could have let Stroud kill me, but you didn't, you cared. You helped, and I've never forgotten that." I didn't know what to say. "Thank you," he said, "for being one of the good ones." And then he was gone, disappearing into the rain and the darkness. I sat there for a long time, staring at the door. The galaxy was full of people who were willing to take, to hurt, to destroy. But there were also people who were willing to give, to help, to build. And maybe that was the lesson. Maybe that was the hope. I thought about all the assassins who'd come after Thorn, and all the ones who'd died or been changed. I thought about Stroud and his new movement. I thought about the refuge network and all the lives it had saved. And I realized this was what it meant to be human. Not just the species, but the idea, the endless, stubborn, impossible refusal to give up. The galaxy needed more of that. More people willing to fight for what's right. More people willing to help, even when it was hard. More people willing to be human. And maybe, just maybe, the rest of us could learn to be the same. I finished my drink and walked out into the rain. The city was quiet, the neon lights reflecting off the wet streets. Somewhere out there in the darkness of space, a human was still fighting, still protecting, still surviving. And somewhere else, a Xeran shadow dancer was fighting the same fight. And somewhere else, I was still alive. Still hopping, still believing that the galaxy could be better. No assassin would take the job. Hunting humans meant certain death. But maybe that wasn't because humans were dangerous. Maybe it was because they were worth protecting. And maybe that was the most dangerous thing of all.